Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark, where we constantly remind you that love is greater than fear and happiness is resistance. I want to thank all of you for joining me. This is your host, Lonnie Clark, with the Age of Fission radio show. And I am doing another reading from Dr. Helen Caldicott's book, The New Nuclear Danger. This plays tonight on KEPW LP 97.3 FM here in Eugene, Oregon, and Springfield. And I want to thank KEPW for carrying my radio show live. And I want to thank all of my listeners who are listening to me on Spreaker and all of my YouTube followers who listen to this on YouTube. And let me get right to it. We are on page 125, as the title says, and we are, I think it is the 6th chapter, or maybe the 7th. Let me see. We're in chapter 7 now. This chapter title is called Space, the Next American Empire. And we are on page 125. And I'm just going to get right to it. I have quite a bit to say, but I want to get through this book. And then I don't think I'll be able to read for the full hour. KEPW gives me an hour of the Age of Fission radio show. So I will be discussing a few things at the end of this once I burn out from reading. But I thought I'd read first and then discuss what's on my heart about things that my listeners need to be thinking about. So hang tight, and I'm probably going to read for about 40 minutes if you plan on skipping through, since maybe you've bought the book, which I highly recommend. It's called The New Nuclear Danger by Dr. Helen Caldicott. Subtitle, George W. Bush's Military-Industrial Complex. And I think since then it's been exposed as, it's not just George W. Bush, it's any president, because the corporations have taken over our military, have taken over our government, and we are at their mercy, and that's just the way it's going to be, folks. So let's get down to this. Recent developments, that's the new subtitle, page 125. The Space Command has recently conducted a range of exercises to demonstrate the supposed need to expand the scope of their program. On July 10th, 2000, for example, an annual joint warrior interoperability. I beg your pardon, folks. An annual joint warrior interoperability demonstration, or JWID, took place at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado, during which industry and government joined forces to demonstrate that Earth-bound warfighters could be supported by integrating space forces and space-derived information with land, air, and sea forces. During this exercise, demonstrations were conducted at many locations around the world, including Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center near Colorado Springs, the U.S. Pacific Command at Camp Smith, Hawaii, and the U.S. Joint Force Command in Norfolk, Virginia. Facilities in many NATO nations were included, as well as U.S. bases in Australia and New Zealand. As Air Force General Ralph E. Eberhart, Commander-in-Chief of the Space Command, said, "It's clear this reliance on space will continue to grow. Traditionally, we talked about space as a combat multiplier in a combat support role. However, now space has become much more basic and intrinsic than just a force multiplier. Space is a prerequisite. It is not a luxury anymore. It is a requirement for conducting military operations. Space has proven itself vital to our national interests." I don't know about you, but that sounds ominous. Like, that's scary. Our national interests. Meanwhile, the Air Force announced on September 8, 2000, that their Aerospace Operations Center, AOC, at Hurlburt Field in Florida, has become an official weapons system. The AOC is essentially a forward-deployed war room described as light, lean, and lethal. during an exercise on September 15, 2000, which assessed Air Force expeditionary forces using new technologies and capabilities in a simulated warfighting environment. The AOC was the hub of all the information coming in from combined live fly forces, models, simulations, technology insertions at 11 different sites across the U.S. Information from space played a major role in this exercise. According to Air Force Chief of Staff General Michael E. Ryan, the AOC will be the eyes, ears, hands, and legs of the commander during a real war operation. Wow. You know what's really scary about this? I don't know how you guys feel, but the fact that there are human beings on this planet who sit around and figure out how to create war. And then the hard part to really come to terms with is that is our tax dollars at work. We are paying people money with our tax dollars to create war. And in fact, we're paying them. They are stealing, literally stealing it because it's in the black budget, which Congress is not aware of. The Pentagon has told us how much trillions of dollars they're missing. And oops, they can't find it. I call that a black budget. It's our tax dollars which are stolen from the military contractors. And that's what this is for. Wow. Let me get back to this book. This just shocks me. I don't know about you, but this is why I wanted to read this book. This information shocks me. This isn't just like, that's a fun little story. This is actually going to affect your child and mine, and ours has affected us. Back to the book. At Fort Bliss, Texas, a simulated military exercise called Roving Sands 2000 took place, again utilizing cyberspace for coordination. Using sophisticated computerized systems, military teams from different locations in the U.S. engaged in separate missions supporting an overall military objective. Not only was the battlefield a simulated target area, all the missile systems and other tools of the engagement were also simulated so that smaller numbers of troops could command a greater range of territory. This was one of the first virtual cyberspace war exercises. New subtitle: Space-Based Star Wars Weapons Under Development. Space-based weapons are exotic, imaginary systems that have never been tried or tested, but many are already under construction. These include space-based lasers, hypersonic military space planes, various forms of anti-satellite weapons, electronic jamming satellites, and space-based nuclear weapons. New subtitle: Swords into Lasers. At least 2 specific space-based laser weapons are already under development, both of which involve a concept the magazine Space Daily calls turning swords into lasers. The space-based laser demonstrator, the first step in space-based weaponry, is currently being developed by Lockheed Martin, TRW, Boeing, the U.S. Air Force, and the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization. The Alpha High Energy Laser is a second space-based laser under development. Also constructed by TRW, it underwent a 20-second successful test firing in 2000. The success of this test was trumpeted by Space Daily as a, quote, significant step forward in the nation's disciplined maturation of the technology required to deploy this space-based laser integrated flight equipment, unquote. I think we need to give them a congratulations because I don't know if you guys saw it, but I actually saw, here we go. Well, this is it. Do you hear that? We actually saw in California space-based lasers hitting the fires. They actually had them down there. Now, I know a lot of people go, ooh, who knows what they put out on the internet, and you see all kinds of things, but I don't know. I'll continue reading. I won't tell you what I think. I get it, that I'm an intuitive feeler and I'm not much on the science stuff. My science is weak. That's why I interview people who can explain the science and do it repeatedly for me, because it still hasn't sunk in 5 or 6 years after reporting about the Fukushima disaster and then tripping into all of this business about nuclear stuff. Like, who would have guessed that they are actually intentionally harming our planet? But bada bada bing, here we are. So let me get back to this book. Wow. The military excitement over and the moral implications of these weapons are reflected in a quote from a 1996 Air Force Board report. In the next 2 decades, technologies will allow the fielding of space-based weapons of devastating effectiveness to be used to deliver energy and mass as force projection, read killing, in tactical strategic conflict. These advances will enable lasers with reasonable mass and cost to effect very many kills. This can be done rapidly, continuously, and with surgical precision, minimizing exposure of friendly forces. The technologies exist or can be developed in this time period. The report continues. Force application by kinetic kill weapons will enable pinpoint strikes on targets anywhere in the world. The equivalent of the Desert Storm strategic air campaign against Iraqi infrastructure would be possible to complete in minutes to hours, essentially on immediate notice. There is dissent. Mike Moore, the former editor of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, wrote in 1999, "The notion that the United States or any country might actually place weapons in space, as envisioned by the U.S. Space Command, is so repugnant that the United States ought to clearly repudiate it. Better yet, it should push to amend the Outer Space Treaty so as to definitively prohibit all weapons in space, not just weapons of mass destruction." This attitude is reflected by the international community, who repeatedly vote at the UN to endorse the Outer Space Treaty, prohibiting the militarization of space. The U.S. consistently abstains. Wow. New subtitle. Why are we shocked? The United States consistently abstains from signing the Outer Space Treaty. Why is that? Hypersonic military space planes. The Air Force is also in the process of developing a plane designed to perform reconnaissance, space control, and strike missions from orbit. Called an Aerospace Operations Vehicle, or AOV, it is a 2-stage, 2-orbit vehicle with reusable booster. It has a mission-specific upper stage, which is based upon Lockheed Martin's X-33 reusable launch vehicle technology demonstrator. Boeing is also involved in the development of the plane, and a full-scale development is projected within 3 years. The most conscientious part of the plane is the upper stage, or Common Aero Vehicle, CAV. They give all these things like these acronyms. A lifting body boost glide vehicle that is designed for immediate attack on Earth targets. So although the space plane is not technically an in-orbit weapon, and thus avoids Clinton's ban on these, it is a strike system that violates the belief, and indeed the UN Outer Space Convention, that space should be weapons-free. While the Clinton administration was reluctant to militarize space, the Bush team will probably endorse this new space plane. This will allow the Air Force to maneuver outside the atmosphere and to place systems in orbit that can be recovered and reused. I don't know about you, but I think you heard about we landed on Mars yesterday, right? Or supposedly landed on Mars. I don't know if we landed on Mars, but if we did, it's not for any good research. Whatever reason you're reading about in the newspaper, if there's actually any kind of vehicle there, they're not doing it for research. They're doing it for this. They are planting their stations there, if They're really there. Now, I've heard people say that they don't believe that we've even made it into outer space because they say that it's too difficult. We get all of this. And they're like, yeah, you made it past, what's it called? That belt. I'm not, again, weak on the science. It's like a radiation belt. And I've been told that you can't get past it. Although, I don't know. We've been just gaslit, folks. Total gaslit. And you know what it's really all about? War, 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 and more war. That's what it's all about. Just for war. For money, because war is profitable. Because we keep throwing our sons and now our daughters in the war machine. We're like, yeah, go join the army. Go join the Navy. That's a good job. Lord. You know what Albert Einstein said? If every single person refused to shoot a gun or press a weapon button, we would not have war. And that is what we need. We need a peace. We really need a peace movement. We need us to be peaceful in our hearts. We need us to be committed to peace ourselves. That instead of yelling at people and striking at people and being malicious, you walk away, you keep your trap shut, you walk away, and you keep calm, and you instigate peace. Lord, we got lots of learning to do on this planet, folks. I'm going to get back to this book so we can get through it. I feel like I'm reading this book with you. That's the thing. It's like, wow. Okay. While the Clinton administration was reluctant to militarize space, the Bush team will probably endorse this new space plane. This will allow the Air Force to maneuver outside the atmosphere and to place systems in orbit that can be recovered and reused. New subtitle: Anti-Satellite Warfare. A whole other area of space-based weapons development involves building and protecting satellites, as well as potentially destroying those of other nations. The Pentagon's term for satellite destruction is navigation warfare, or NAVWAR. Wow! Because satellites have become essential to commercial, scientific, and national security services, the United States believes that it must control all satellite use. Satellites have no built-in protective mechanisms and are extremely vulnerable to attack, but until recently, no one thought to protect them. As Alan Thomas, a retired CIA analyst, said, attack on a satellite would be like an act of war. Yet lasers can readily destroy satellites. So can something as simple as buckshot introduced into low Earth orbit where the satellites function. Computer hackers can interrupt signals sent between satellites and their ground operators. The commandos can attack ground satellites that serve as control centers or relay points for data. NASA and the Air Force are also building a Space Maneuverable Vehicle, SMV. Build is giving the Air Force a new flexibility in space operations. The SMV has anti-satellite applications as well. Other methods of satellite destruction, many of which rely on cyber technology, are in the development. An order from the National Security Command Authority in 1999, backed by President Clinton and his Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, recently instructed the military to gear up to wage cyber war. Cyber war involves attacking satellites and infecting them with virus-like systems, rendering them inoperable. To this end, Lieutenant General Edward Anderson, Deputy Commander-in-Chief at the U.S. Space Command, was assigned the task of creating cyber war strategies, including massive denial-of-service assaults that can be unleashed by launching crippling viruses called Trojan horses and jamming the enemy's computer systems with electric radio frequency interference. Isn't that interesting, folks? And that is exactly what the Russians did in our elections. They just sort of jimmy-rigged all of the computer systems, right? I mean, that is what the Pentagon and all these, every agency that looked into it said, yeah, that's what they're doing. So kind of a payback, isn't it? Because the Russians are going, hey, you're not going to be the only ones in outer space, folks. You gots to share the Earth. What is wrong with the Pentagon's military advisors? Are they just complete lunatic maniacs? Greedy? Is greed the only thing they see? It's sick. It's a mental illness. It's really sad. I'm going to keep reading. New subtitle. Threat to U.S. satellite systems. Because the Pentagon has been planning anti-satellite warfare, it is intensely aware of that its own satellites are at risk. Indeed, so vulnerable is America's satellite program that her present critical advantage in warfare could be destroyed if her GPS system was damaged. Private satellites now used for military communications are also vulnerable. For instance, the Iridium satellite constellation could be irreparably damaged if just one receiving building on the ground were destroyed. Signals from GPS satellites travel like radio waves and are available to anyone with a receiver. It is thought that China could develop anti-satellite techniques within 10 years, while a private Russian company has already developed a handheld GPS jammer with a range of 150 miles. In fact, enemy countries already use the American GPS system to enhance the accuracy of their weapons, including Scud missiles in North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. And she has the word enemy in quotes. Meanwhile, American satellites continue to become more and more sophisticated. The next generation of spy satellites was launched in 2000, smaller and more numerous than those in orbit, and is able to distinguish ground objects so small as 6 inches from a height of 500 miles. Wow! Canada is about to launch a satellite with these capabilities, with more to follow. I bet lots more have already followed. When was this book written, you guys? 2002. It's 2018. Can you imagine what they've already done? We need another mega brain like Dr. Caldicott to write a new book about this stuff again and tell us what's really going on. I want to thank Dr. Caldicott for writing this book and making it so simple to understand. It's shocking, but at least we're comprehending it. New subtitle, The Philosophy of Anti-Satellite Warfare. Anti-satellite warfare is a tenuous proposition. How do you destroy other countries' satellites without endangering your own? How can you separate yourself from other countries when the communication systems are so interdependent? For instance, the Army conducted a war game in 1998. The enemy was a fictitious country in the Middle East. During the exercise, China provided the enemy with satellite imagery of U.S. troop movements using the same satellites the U.S. uses to monitor its own troops. Should the U.S. destroy the satellites under these circumstances? And how can we distinguish between the peaceful and legitimate uses of satellite technology and those that are aspects of an overly militarized defense? For example, it is now commonplace for the Pentagon to intersperse radomes of intelligence gathering with Star Wars radomes. R-A-D-O-M-E-S. I hope I'm saying that word right. Radomes. Buckley Air Force Base, located east of Denver in Aurora, Colorado, the largest consolidated intelligence center in the Western Hemisphere, is jointly used by the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, and the National Security Agency, NSA. Buckley boasts 13 radomes, big white domes that envelop downloading stations for satellite data. Used for space-based intelligence gathering, they are also an integral component of the Star Wars systems and will download information from the new high-orbit space-based infrared systems, this SBIRS High, SPIRS High. A familiar commingling of uses is happening at Pine Gap in Australia and at Menwith Hill in England. Because intelligence gathering is top secret, this technique is combined intelligence gathering, and Star Wars planning can also be used to prevent local politicians from inspecting American Star Wars bases, vehemently opposed by the general public in those two countries. Because the military is so dependent upon them, the Space Command stopped publishing information on the whereabouts of their 27 GPS satellites previously posted on the NASA website. Good thinking, dudes. Most satellites, military or commercial, have no defenses against the attack by laser beams or other objects targeted to destroy them. It is very expensive to add protective mechanisms to satellites because they add extra weight and launch costs become prohibitive. It costs $10,000 a pound to launch a payload into low Earth orbit, and shielding mechanisms are heavy. Former Virginia Democratic Senator Charles Robb, a member of the Senate Arms Committee, said that the development of space weapons, including anti-satellite capabilities, would be a mistake of historic proportions that would trigger an arms race in space. He noted that other nations would necessarily follow the U.S.'s example, and frantic generals, unable to know exactly who has put what in orbit, would plead for extravagant countermeasures. The increasing interdependency of the global economy and all military systems on satellite technology means that all destructive military thinking must cease and be replaced by an international resolution to preserve space for peaceful purposes only. In other words, the civil lawmakers must exert control over their aberrant military. Let us read that again. What do you think of that idea? I think that's a great idea. For real, we have got to hear this again. The increasing interdependency of the global economy and all military systems on satellite technology means that all destructive military thinking must cease and must be replaced by international resolution to preserve space for peaceful purposes only. In other words, the civilian lawmakers must exert control over their aberrant military. Exactly. They must exert control over their aberrant military. That is what we have right now. New subtitle, Mars and the Asteroids. While John Collins said that the moon contains valuable minerals and resources, he did not mention that the asteroids and other planets are also being examined for possible economic exploitation. You bet. The U.S. plans to send manned and unmanned missions to Mars in the near future to explore and extract valuable minerals for earthly use. And that is exactly what they're doing, folks, right now. They have a mission on Mars right now. They just landed it yesterday, and they said they're doing it for research. No, they're not. They're not doing it for research. Their research is how much stuff here can we take, and when can we put a space-based mission here so we can control space. These people are lunatics. Enthusiasm for the project was somewhat tempered in 1999 when NASA experienced two man-made catastrophes. The Mars Climate Orbiter and the Mars Polar Lander both mysteriously disappeared. The Climate Orbiter was lost after a navigational error sent it skimming too deep into the Martian atmosphere because engineers failed to convert English to metric units. The Polar Lander, which incorporated innovative lightweight materials, extraordinarily small microchips, and a low-cost laser-based navigational system, was scheduled to make a soft landing on September 23, 1999, at the Martian South Pole. It would drop two probes, which, falling at high speed, would penetrate a few feet into the Martian crust to explore for evidence of groundwater. NASA realized just prior to lander's arrival that the mission was doomed because of a fatal design flaw. Lander probably blew up. Well, they successfully, or so they said yesterday, and today's date is what, the 27th of November, 2018. Just yesterday, they said they landed something there. So they're headed on, folks. That's why this book is pertinent. But NASA scientists, undeterred, are planning future expeditions, including missions to recover rock samples from Mars and to do deep drilling for search for water, microbes, and minerals. Shell Oil and Los Alamos National Lab are among the outside groups assisting NASA in these investigations. The orbits of Earth and Mars offer favorable flight opportunities once every 25 months when they are in a position that the trip takes less than a year. The current Mars schedule is as follows. In the spring of 2001, the Mars Odyssey orbiter was launched, equipped with remote sensors to study surface minerals. In 2003, 2 small roving vehicles will be launched to land. Let me see what this says. Launched to land on Mars in January 2004. These are 300-pound wheeled robots capable of traveling 300 feet a day while taking pictures, analyzing rocks, and investigating surface geology and possible subsurface deposits. In 2005, NASA plans to send a Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which will be modeled on the now successful Mars Global Surveyor, still in orbit mapping Mars, for further mapping. In 2007, a smart landing craft will be launched, equipped with precision guidance and navigation, a hazard avoidance system so that future missions will be able to land in the prescribed place all in one piece. Also in 2007, the first Scout mission deploying instrument-bearing balloons or a small airplane will be launched. Again, in 2007, NASA and the Italian Space Agency may team to place an orbiting satellite around Mars to help relay the increasing heavy communications load from the Martian spacecraft. France may also participate. In 1999, NASA may team with the Italian Space Agency to deploy ground-penetrating radar to prospect for water while in orbit. These flights are being planned to search for water and traces of life, past or present. NASA's long-term plan is to launch a sample return mission sometime during 2011 to 14. Let me mark this page because I want to see if any of that happened and see what was related in, let me mark, I'll say, look this up. Because I want to follow up with this. That would be interesting since we're reading this book and it is 16 years old. Most of this stuff has already been planned and settled. So I'm thinking they either did some of this and succeeded or they did some and it didn't succeed and then they decided to change something else up. So we're at 33 minutes in. I'll keep reading, you guys. And I want to thank you for listening to this book. It's pretty interesting. I hope you're enjoying it. If you guys want to get in touch with me, you can. If you ever want to make a comment, I'll just give you my phone number. You can call my cell phone, 541-337-4664. And my email address at the end of the show, I say ageoffission@gmail, AGEOFFISSION@gmail. Frankly, you can call me at nutzfoart. That's my YouTube channel name, NUTZFORART. That's how you find me on YouTube. And I think I'm at 399 subscribers. I just need one more, you guys, to get to 400. Woo-hoo. Back to the book. Okay, here we are. Man trips to Mars are on the drawing board. There's a possibility that some very primitive forms of life exist on the planet. The atmosphere probably contains traces of hydrogen peroxide, a strong oxidizing agent, and the planet is bathed in searingly high levels of ultraviolet light. Hence, any trace of life would be found only at some depths from the surface. Human habitation of Mars, a dream of many at NASA and other influential scientific organizations, will present huge physiological problems. An article written by Jerome Groopman, a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, in The New Yorker in January 2000, summarizes this medical dilemma. Groopman questions whether human beings can survive weightlessness and deep space radiation for prolonged periods. He worries about the possibility of psychological ramifications of isolation, stress, and confinement, and the problem of medical emergencies that would arise during the trip. Among other problems, it is virtually impossible for the human body, which evolved under the influence of gravity, to survive intact without it. Blood, under which the influence of gravity normally pools in the legs and lower body, rushes to the head, triggers severe pounding headaches. The fluid-controlling mechanisms are fooled by this redistribution, and dehydration rapidly develops as the kidneys excrete the excess fluid. The thickened blood then sends signals to the bone marrow to cease making red blood cells, including a mild anemia. Muscles and bones almost melt in a weightless environment. Tendons and ligaments deteriorate, and minor stresses cause both ligaments and muscles to tear like paper tissue. Bone mass dissolves at a rate of 1.5% per month. Then there is a danger from radiation emanating from the cosmic rays. These are essentially iron particles traveling at the speed of light that go right through the body, causing breakage of chromosomes and destruction of genes. Chromosomal and genetic damage increases the risk of developing cancer. And a recent review by the National Research Council found a 40% increased cancer risk from a trip to Mars, more than 10 times higher than deemed acceptable. More than 10 times higher than the level deemed acceptable. Like, what's an acceptable level? The way they create these arbitrary acceptable levels. Oh, yeah, so is 8 times or 1 time an acceptable level? Like, Jeez Louise, the thinking behind these creed is just beyond comprehension. Surgery under any circumstances would be highly dangerous. If someone injured a leg, the most appropriate treatment might well be amputation rather than an arduous repair, and a head injury would be almost impossible to treat. Neurosurgery at 0G could not be imagined. Sleep deprivation, monotony, claustrophobia, anxiety, and depression will produce mental instability. It has been noted during missions in harsh, lonely environments that more than 10% of the subjects develop serious problems of psychological adaptation, and up to 3% develop psychiatric disorders such as major depression. It has been recommended that older astronauts be chosen for a Mars trip because they would not live long enough to develop cancer from the cosmic radiation, or have fewer years to lose if they did. Wow, now that's logic. Let's get the old folks to go first. Also, younger men would be unable to have children because of radiation damage to their sperm. Wow. Yes, this is like Dr. Strangelove. It's in action here, folks. There are also grave concerns about the introduction of Martian material into the Earth's biosphere may inject microorganisms that could unleash serious hazards. Until the recent NASA Mars failures, plans to return Martian samples to Earth were scheduled for 2008, but that date has been delayed until 2011. Barry DeGregorio, who founded the International Committee Against Mars Sample Return, pointed out some pertinent lessons from history. In the early to mid 1300s, 1/4 of Europeans died when a flea from China carrying an unfamiliar microbe was introduced into a susceptible population. When the Spaniards explored the Americas, They introduced the smallpox virus that decimated tens of thousands of native inhabitants, hundreds of thousands. European explorers infected the susceptible native inhabitants of the Polynesian and Hawaiian Islands with many different infectious diseases. Nearly half of these populations died. So there's actually someone who founded a committee, International Committee Against Mars Sample Return. International Committee Against ICAMSR. Oh, my goodness. At present, NASA plans to return the Martian samples to Earth in a passive Earth entry capsule that will enter the atmosphere without a parachute and slam into the Utah desert, where it will sustain a 300 to 400 G-force impact. Engineers say that the capsule will remain intact, but the potential ramifications of a mistake are difficult even to contemplate. A report issued by the Space Studies Board of the National Research Council, NRC, a research arm of the National Academy of Sciences, concluded that space samples will require very careful handling, and NASA must create a special facility to contain any material that might be contaminated with dangerous organisms. While they pointed out that the risk of bringing back something very dangerous is extremely low, it is not zero. NASA must err on the side of being prudent. Dr. Caldicott is so sweet, isn't she? She makes all these demands and says they have to do this, and they're just like, sorry, wouldn't want to be like for real. I mean, we're reading a book that is 16 years old, and we know everything in this book that she's suggesting they not do, they have done and embraced. I mean, these people are driving the train straight towards the brick wall. We're headed there. We landed something on Mars for research. Right. Let's get back to her book. John Rummel, NASA Planetary Protection Officer, said that NASA will quarantine the Martian samples in a high-level containment facility familiar to those used to harbor the world's deadliest viruses. But De Gregorio said, if we make one mistake, it could mean the extinction, maybe for our species or maybe another. For instance, bumblebees or phytoplankton, which are a huge part of our ecology. NASA's interest is not limited to Mars. A NASA mission scheduled for November 2003 will orbit Europa, a moon of Jupiter, which may have a deep, watery ocean. The next Europa mission may launch a submarine into this ocean to explore it, which exposes the probes to massive concentrations of damaging extraterrestrial radiation similar to that experienced in post-nuclear war. The Colorado School of Mines, long involved in the concepts of space mining and mineral extraction, and in space-based market development and mineral economics, is the motivating force behind these extraordinary, ambitious mining plans. Engineering students and faculty are currently establishing an ongoing space utilization roundtable to calculate methods to retrieve useful products and services from space. Everything from tourism to mining, solar power, water extraction, and manufacturing on the moon is under consideration. Space mining may be 10 to 20 years away, but someone has to start thinking about these possibilities now, they say. Let me see how far we are. We have 15 more minutes. International Space Station new subtitle. On October 31st, 2000, a 3-member Expedition 1 crew was launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in a Russian Soyuz rocket to dock at the International Space Station 2 days later. Let me read that name of that vehicle again, launched from the Baikonur, Baikonur, Cosmodrome. Baikonur Cosmodrome. This 8th mission marked the start of a permanent human presence in space, initiating a planned permanent occupancy of 10 years. It is intended that the ISS will eventually be the launching pad for missions to other planets. A total of 16 countries are involved in this project: Russia, Germany, Belgium, Canada, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, France, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, the US, the UK, and Brazil. More than 900 researchers from these and other countries are developing experiments to be conducted in zero-gravity conditions in fields such as biotechnology, combustion science, fluid physics, material science, life sciences, engineering and technology, and earth sciences. The stated goals of the International Space Station are as follows. Most are worthy, but some are troublesome. To find solutions to crucial problems in medicine, ecology, and other areas of science. To lay the foundation for developing space-based commerce and enterprise. To create worldwide demand for space-based related education at all levels by cultivating the excitement, wonder, and discovery that the ISS symbolizes. To foster world peace through high-profile, long-term international cooperation in space. It would appear that the internationalism of the ISS would mitigate against unilateral exploitation and control of space by a single nation. However, I do not trust the present Bush administration, and Congress has rarely acted in the best interests of the international community. The military and space corporations, along with other multinationals, paid billions of dollars in the last U.S. elections and have control over upcoming legislation. Furthermore, the Republican right wing openly supports U.S. militarization and domination of space. Is the function of the ISS just window dressing for a more ominous future? Yes, it is, Dr. Caldicott. As a matter of fact, ding, 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 you get a star. Asking the right questions. Although people don't want to hear the answer because that's what it is. I think she's funny. She's very sweet. She's very quite optimistic in her questioning. Nuclear devices in space, new subtitle. We're at 48 minutes in. I'm going to keep going because I'm actually very much enjoying this. Nuclear devices in space. The surface of Mars is bone dry and covered with a fine dust of an average particle size of about 2 microns, the same dimensions as cigarette smoke. The dust is so fine and pervasive that it would gum up spacesuits, scratch helmet visors, induce electrical shorts, sandblast instruments, and clog motors. The corrosive hydrogen peroxide in the Martian atmosphere could also slowly wear away rubber seals. Astronauts would need to maintain a dust-free environment because tiny particles of inhaled silicone dust induce a severe lung disease called silicosis. These particles will be electrically charged so that the dust will cling to everything. But the dust means something else. Solar power necessary to fuel emission would become almost impossible to generate because Martian powder would accumulate on the solar panels. On the Mars Pathfinder mission, for example, the electrical output from the solar panels fell 1% every 3 days as the powder covered them. Therefore, the preferred choice for power generation becomes nuclear in the form of a 100-kilowatt nuclear reactor. And this brings us to some of the worst of the Star Wars hazards that will threaten planet Earth. Nuclear-powered rockets, orbiting nuclear reactors destined for asteroids, the moon, or Mars, and plutonium-fueled space probes to investigate other planets, all of which pose potentially severe risks to the Earth's biological systems. NASA consistently plays down these nuclear threats, which are an integral part of its space program, while emphasizing the glory of space research and of extraterrestrial adventure. But the threats are very serious. So we're at 10 minutes in. We're at a new subtitle called The History of Nuclear Devices in Space. And we're on page 137, and I think I'm going to stop there because I do want to give us a few words about things that are happening here in the Northwest and really, frankly, on our planet Earth about the status and what we can do as citizens to help protect our planet. Because we're not being encouraged or asked to help in any way. It is really up for us to do it. And I want to encourage every single person who hears this podcast to at least take one action. I personally have a preference that your one action at least be this one. Go to the Hanford Challenge page, hanfordchallenge.org. Make your voice heard, because the Department of Energy, they extended the comment periods for them reclassifying high levels of radioactive contamination. They're just going to reclassify it into low level and say, oh, well, it's not very much. It's 62,000 gallons, which for them is a little drop considering they have moved millions of gallons on the Hanford farms. That's what they call them, the Hanford tank farms. Can you believe it? They call them tank farms to make it sound nice and homey, nice and tank farms up there in Hanford. But it's full of plutonium and americium and cesium and nuclear contamination up the yin-yang, folks. And they have been emptying these tanks at Tank C. And they have had 18 tanks that they've been emptying. And for like 18 years, I'm getting the numbers all mixed up, but they've been emptying this tank for 18 years. And they're at the end of the process, and they have a very small amount left over. 62,000 gallons. And because they have to create a machine to be able to come and deal with it, because it's the muckiest of the muck of the sludge, because when their tools get too radioactive, they throw them in the tanks. So at the bottom of the tanks is not just radioactive sludge, it's all this metal and stuff that's been thrown in there, all their equipment, all the stuff that they can't use, they just throw it in there. And they want to pour concrete on it and clap their hands, say, good to go, we'll see you later, like they did in the Marshall Islands. You guys are good. We've buried the contamination. We're all safe. No, we're not. We cannot let them do that. We need every person to make a comment at the Department of Energy website. You need to call your senators, Ron Wyden, Jeff Merkley, Maria Cantwell, what's her name, Patty Murray. You need to call Governor Jay Inslee, Kate Brown. If you're listening in California, call your new Gavin, whatever his name is. Call your senators, Feinstein. Boxer's not your senator, I don't know. Oh, Kamala Harris, I guess. I mean, this matters, especially to us on the West Coast. This is really serious. We cannot allow them to just bury the waste at the Hanford tanks and just leave it there to sink into the Columbia River to seep out into the Pacific. We're already being bombarded by Fukushima. It's completely outrageous. If you're on the West Coast or on the East Coast, there's things that you can do. On the East Coast, I mean, you guys have big, huge problems. To be honest, on the East Coast, you guys are really in bad shape because the Indian Point Nuclear Power Facility is leaking 66,000% the levels of tritium into the Hudson Bay for several years now. It's missing like bolts, 19 bolts. There is no emergency exit plan out of New York City when Indian Point has a nuclear meltdown or some kind of mega catastrophe. You guys need to be prepared to bunker down and then get out. Call your congressmen, call your senators, stay on them. They are the oversight committees to the nuclear industry. Demand sanity. And you know what we really need to do? This is my opinion. Besides a truth and reconciliation program, we really need that, where we can come together and that we can get corporate control away from science. But we need to develop remediation services. We need to make that a big industry. We need to focus not on going into outer space. We don't need to go stealing water from Mars planets. Who knows if that water is good for us to drink? We need to fix our own waters. And I think if we have universal education, educate the beautiful children that we have in our country, we can come up with solutions. I don't know if we can save ourselves. Guy McPherson says we're past the tipping point. But I don't know about you, but I'm not going to go down without a fight. Obviously, I'm out here putting out a podcast week after week that a few hundred, and yes, a few hundred. I want to get to 400, you guys, on Nuts for Art, NUTZFORART on YouTube. Click and subscribe. Listen to my YouTube videos. I play this podcast there. I actually do put up my Saturday interviews. I put up Nuclear Hot Seat. And I make my videos throughout the week on YouTube and talk to my YouTube community about my opinions about, that's what YouTube's for. Kind of like I share information and then I give my opinions. And if anybody's mean to me, I block them. That's why I like YouTube. I get to block them. So anyways, I see we're at 56 minutes. I'm going to end here. If anybody wants to give me a little ringy-dingy, you could send me an email at Age of Fission, AGEOFFISSION, or at nutzfoart, NUTZFORART, because I am Nuts for Art. nutzfoart at Gmail, and that's my YouTube channel, Nuts for Art. I'm Nuts for Art on Instagram if you want to follow me on Instagram, a little bit more friendly, but I am very politically active on Instagram. I'm on Twitter as Nuts for Art 2, the number 2. I had Nuts for Art and I couldn't figure out how to reset the password, so I just redid it as Nuts for Art 2, and I've stuck with that because I can get into that one. So thank you for joining us. And you know what? Thank you for paying attention. I want to thank every one of you who is listening to this podcast. I love you for being involved in this. And I love you for caring enough to listen to this book and to following my podcast and following this information, getting active. Please, in the comment section on my YouTube channel, let me know what you're doing to get active. Even if it just means standing out on the street all by yourself. But please share your activities. It is political. I mean, everything is politics, folks. If you think it's not, listen to this book. That's being paid for with our tax dollars. That's political. It's me and you. We're members of this society. So as adults, we have a responsibility to help give something to our children. So I'm going to end here. I want to thank you all for joining me. Please join us. We're live on Saturday mornings on KEPW at 7:30 in the morning on KEPW LP 97.3 FM here in Springfield and Eugene, where no voice goes unheard, community-focused and community-based. So put your courage feet on, and you know what I say? Happiness is resistance. So, and what else? Love is greater than fear. We need a love revolution, folks. So let us walk in love and be fearless. Let us love each other fearlessly. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye. The Age of Fission radio show brings you book readings, pertinent articles, interviews with both activists and victims of nuclear and environmental contamination. We strive to deliver only the facts from reliable sources. We want to remind you that love is greater than fear, and happiness is resistance. Our dedication to love and happiness paves the road for innovation and healing. As we face our harsh reality, let us hold each other up and rejoice in our humanity. If you want to comment, please send your thoughts to ageoffision@gmail.com. That's AGEOFFISSION @gmail.com. to your host, Lonnie Clark.